This material is made available to you by or on behalf of the University of Melbourne under Section 113P of the Copyright Act 1968. It may be subject to copyright. For more information, visit the University Copyright website.
On behalf of us all, I pay my respects to their elders, past and present. Welcome everybody to the 2019 Seabrook Chambers Lecture, and it is a particular pleasure to welcome our speaker tonight, Professor Jiunn-rong Yeh, about whom I'll say a little more in a moment. I'd also like to thank Professor Cheryl Saunders for the inimitable agency she played in organising the visit of Professor Jiunn-rong Yeh. So Cheryl, as always, thank you. Just by way of process, Cheryl will chair the questions subsequent to the lecture, and you are invited to ask questions. We welcome those indeed. Another very significant announcement I have to make is to remind you all to turn off your mobile phones. And if anyone objects to being photographed, if they'd please let Abigail, who's in the back at the left and will wave to you, know. Tonight's event is part of the annual Seabrook Chambers Lecture Series, which was established by former judges of the Accident Compensation Tribunal in the state of Victoria. The lectures are given by often scholars, but also members of the public with a keen interest and very high-standing international reputation on issues that affect or go to the heart of the rule of law in Australia and internationally. And tonight's lecture does indeed go to the heart of the rule of law. We are here gathered to hear about Taiwan's same-sex marriage legislation, the first of its kind in Asia. And our speaker, Professor Jiunn-rong Yeh, is the National Taiwan University Chair Professor. Jiunn-rong Yeh is very well known to some of us here. He has a long and illustrious career working often at the coalface of politics and then leading the Academy across many fundamental legal issues, but with a particular focus on constitutional law, regulatory theories and environmental sustainability. He has led Taiwan's Research, Development and Evaluation Commission from 2004 to 2008. And in 2016, he was appointed Taiwan's Minister of the Interior and then was named Minister for Education in 2018. Jiunn-rong Yeh has played a crucial role in drafting various major legislative instruments, including the Freedom of Information Act and the Administrative Procedural Acts in Taiwan. Jiunn-rong Yeh has taught in many major universities, including Duke, Columbia, Toronto, Harvard, and of course Melbourne. His recent books include The Constitution of Taiwan, a contextual analysis, and those of us who've had cause to resort to that text understand it for the significant and singular contribution it made, not only to the understanding of the Constitution of Taiwan, but also to understanding how that fits and is situated in the context of constitutions globally. I was fortunate enough, I think it's about 5 years ago, it might be 6 years ago, Jiunn-rong, to have visited National Taiwan University, where a project on courts in the region was being led by you and your colleagues. And the way in which we came together to consider the topic produced yet another one of your wonderful publications, Asian Courts in Context. I think we are particularly fortunate tonight to hear someone speaking to same-sex marriage legislation in Taiwan who has sat both within the government and within the academy, stewarding reform and change over a long period and culminating in this major reform. So it is an extraordinary pleasure to welcome you and to invite you to give the lecture. Thanks, Jiunn-rong.
Thank you, Dean Nicholson. And thank you, as you mentioned, Cheryl you have been my mentor, and particularly in the area of Asian constitutional law studies. Actually, you brought me in Nepal in 1994. You know, at that time I was someone trained in the United States, focused on U.S. and European theories in constitutional law, you know, without paying too much attention on the region. And then gradually I developed an interest in the region and inspired by lots of faculties from Melbourne, you know, looking into the function of the constitutional institution and how they work, how they deal with the problems, and gradually develop my confidence and also interest into the dialogue with with my peer in this region, including people in Japan, Korea, in Vietnam, in Thailand, in Malaysia, Indonesia, many places. And that's why we come up with the interest of doing what people were saying, for example, Asian court in context. You know, we look into the court function in various Asian jurisdiction and compile them and come up with some sort of observation and predicting the trend and also the challenges ahead like that. You know, and that book was published by Cambridge University and draw more attention to Asia. So I need to say it's just like coming back home, and also lots of friends, you know, Andrea, you know, and lots of friends I can't mention each one of you, but thank you very much. Melbourne Law has been a place that sort of attract my attention in some academic areas, and I come back just like coming home again, and today I'm going to share with you. Should be a case, but this is not simply a case. This is happening in this region, and with profound constitutional, social, political, and theoretical significance. So it's not only about Taiwan, it's about the region. And maybe it's about reflecting some of the problems that we are facing today. Say, for example, we are facing the problem of democratic backsliding in all forms, almost in every part of the continent. You know, in different forms, of course. When there is an election, or even out of election, thanks to internet and social media, you know, we have lots of problems in terms of fake news, fake information, and how to deal with that democratically based on rule of law and constitutional principles. And that has been happening in many parts of the world. Some area, they are confronting this issue with even heightened alert because they worry whether this is something coming from the other jurisdiction. You know, and particularly in Taiwan, you know, with that kind of tense, you know, cross-strait relations, this kind of problem, how to safeguard democracy, you know, has become one of the biggest challenge to new democracies in the world. So this same-sex marriage issue, it ended with a success. When we say success, that is very controversial. But the constitutional system and government structure was able to respond to that, handle that, in the end with a result that most of the people feel satisfied, relieved, and based on that to move on. So I'm going to sort of share with you this happening and the contextual underpinnings of that, and try to draw some sort of theoretical underpinnings out of that. Well, let's begin with this map. This is the first time I see Taiwan and and Australia are so close to each other. You see? So close to each other. Only Taiwan and Australia in this, the eastern part of the map, represent the same position. And if we join by South Africa, this is not in Georgia. It's also very interesting, but Taiwan and Australia about the same population size. But of course, the land is so different. Taiwan is so small, and it's an island. I'm facing the big continent. But also neighbors to many, very vibrant democracies and also economies. So it's very interesting to know among about 26 or 27 countries legalized same-sex marriage. And Taiwan is the only sort of dot over there with that vast continent. So this is what we are talking about. That is almost 6 months ago. The Act for Implementation of JY Interpretation number 748. This is a very, very odd name, right? Can you imagine that is the name of the statute carry on, a name, the decisions, and I will explain that to you. The law legalized same-sex marriage was implemented. That means from that day, from that people can go and register. That is May the 24th. 2 years ago, exactly the same day, the Constitutional Court of Taiwan promulgated an interpretation. And that interpretation, we call that Interpretation 748. For all of you who know Taiwan's constitutional, judicial review system, we always by numbers. So this is 7. This is in the category of 7. We have a decision in the category of 2, began with 261. That was the one who asked the representative elected from China to retire, paving the way for our congressional reform. So this 2061. So in our memory, we always pick up some important numbers. It's not for lottery, but but it's really some of those are very significant. 748, for sure, is going to be one of the most significant constitutional decisions in Taiwan, and maybe also for comparative constitutional study, also very, very significant. So on the same day, household officers start to accept same-sex marriage and also enjoy the same status. So this is the news report on that day. And it says in historical first for Asia. In fact, we didn't know too much about whether we are the first or not, because it's not important. What's important is how you move forward to resolve an issue and to push forward for something that this society just needs so much. But when they remind us that this is the first for Asia, people begin to think, is that so? What does it take to be the first in Asia? What are the contextual variables or contextual significance out of that? How are we going to see that happening? And then this is Washington Post, BBC, The Guardian. So let me provide you some statistics. On the first day of the implementation, 526 same-sex couples registered for marriage. And then in the first month, 1,173, up to the end of October, 2,390. So this is a real thing. This is a real thing, okay. But several years back, there was one gay person. He's just like someone selling bubble tea to us on the corner, in Taiwan. It's a normal person. He started to register, try to register in the 80s for same-sex marriage and got rejected by the household authority and then got rejected by the court. And on and off, in the court, out of the court, in the household agency and out of household agency. It seems that nobody seems to care too much about him. But today, people all know him because he is the one who actually brought a case to the Constitutional Court, resulting in interpretation number 748 after his second trial in the Constitutional Court. Of course, for this one, why he succeeded? Because a group of people, I would say a coalition of social groups, composed of lawyers and also professionals, supported him. It's the first time that he got supported tremendously, and in the end was able to gain this victory. If this is in, say, in the United States or in other jurisdictions, they normally name the case A versus B, right? This 748 interpretation should be named Chi versus something. So this is a different name. Chi never be put in the name of the case, but he will be remembered. So it's a different model, and I put it in as a joke, Chi versus JY 748. Because it's in Taiwan, so we remember Judicial Interpretation 748. We then remember 748 more than Chi, okay? And which is quite embarrassing because if you watch Miserable or, they Chong Ba Chong was saying, who am I? And in the end say, I am 24601. It's a number. So is this decision a number? I would say no, it's more than a number. Lots of spirit and soul and energy, blood spent in this case. And also lots of judicial wisdom and strategies behind, not to mention the expectation of the society. Okay, so not only that, I was going to say in Taiwan, the biggest supporter of same-sex marriage actually are young generations. You can see the statistics, and it's quite clear, so clear. And unlike Chi or that group of young generation, there were victims and casualties. In the year 2000, and I will just name two, 15-year-old student Ye Yongzhi, Mr. Ye, who was reportedly being bullied in the school to death. And that has contributed to the passage of the Gender Equality Education Act in 2004. So the first pro-LGBT legislation in terms of sexual orientation was this law, education law. So we started with education, not the law that we are talking about today, but we started with that. And that was extremely important because when you start with the education and then bring about the social awareness, and that's very critical for social change, for legal change, for the recognition of rights. So that's one. The second one is, as a Professor B, and I don't want to mention the name. He is from France and have been in Taiwan for such a long time, devoting all his life to education in Taiwan, National Taiwan University. His partner died, and he couldn't get a chance to support legally in any way. 1 year after, in year 2006. He jumped over the building and to death. And that heightened the discussion and deliberation of the bill at that time pending in the Congress. And I will briefly talk about the legislative efforts in the Congress. But this has something to do with that. So at least the two cases like this. So for us, it may be a progressive law, but for others, they may be the one who have been suffering from that kind of problem, that kind of lack of recognition and discrimination in their daily life. And these are two examples. And what is the law? You know, before we talk about this issue, family law. Well, Taiwan, we have a civil code, like other continental legal systems. Civil code with more than 1,000 provisions, and in that civil code, we have a special section about family law, and then special section about inheritance. So family law is embedded in the big civil code. Civil code is considered as a very important legal structure for family, for personal dealing, for contract, for property, for things like that. But it's part of the civil code. Article 972, like many other legislation, says an agreement to marry shall be made by male and female parties. And this also, the Article 980 also say something about women, something about men, So this is the idea. And how are we going to go with that? How are we going to deal with that kind of structure? You should maybe you should change the civil code. Or you have other way of dealing with that. That is put a special regulation, a special statute to recognize same-sex marriage. So with this statutory structure, the issue actually is there. Whether we will fundamentally change civil code or we put up a special statute for that. And there has been routine denial to registration with same-sex marriage by the Household Registration Authority. There are many bills pending since after 2006. Lots of bills were introduced into the Congress. Well, I should say in Taiwan, normally the bill was introduced by the agency, by the executive agency, the responsible agency. It is a rare occasion that legislators, they introduce bill of their own. Of course, increasingly they do that. But in the past, normally, also according to the Constitution, it is up to the executive to send the bill to the legislature for contemplation. So when the first legislator, Xiao Kim, she introduced the law, same-sex marriage bill in 2006. It was just a breakthrough, but nothing happened actually. In short of support and also media attention. 2013 is a big year for the movement because at that time there were coalitions of the groups and they began to drop the bill. Drop the bill for the legislator. So instead of waiting for the legislature to come up with a bill, civil groups dropped the bill themselves. I should say, when Pip introduced me, at some role in drafting some bill, for professors, it is a golden opportunity. Sometimes the agency, the agency would rely on your expertise in drafting the bill, but sometimes the civil society would like to include you in guiding them how to move on. And their idea is that to lobby in the Congress, hoping that one of them or many of them will introduce the bill, in the Congress. And that was exactly what happened. At that time, that was that alliance. That alliance is composed of many groups. Drop the diversified family structure bill, 多元成家. That's the one. Try very comprehensively come up with all kinds of union, including a group of people, they retire, they want to live together as a union. That is also one possibility. And then, all kinds of possibility. Sort of redefine what do we mean by family. And it's a very big departure to our traditional way of notion of family. 2006, there was also an attempt to revise the civil code itself. This is a very big move because it will encounter tremendous obstacle. Conservatives are going to go out and oppose that in any way. So revising the civil code is considered as more serious than setting up a separate statute, in the eyes of the conservatives. They try to safeguard the fundamental structure, that is family, that is, men and women forming the. Okay, the road to recognition, gender equality. Oh, sorry. Here I want to mention that LGBT rights recognition actually is part of Taiwan's gender mainstreaming movement. And I'm quite proud of this movement because many of my colleagues, female lawyers, professors, over last 3 decades participated in social movement in the recognition of gender equality, particularly women's rights, including political participation, workplace, equality, and everything, educational opportunity. So we gained tremendous progress in this area, including lots of constitutional decisions, petitioned by women group, supported by women lawyers, and they succeeded one by one. So I have lots of experience in asking the court to declare one provision of civil code unconstitutional. That have been the routine and maybe one of the most noticeable success in a broad category of social movement. And LGBT is part of the movement. Not only about that, gender mainstreaming movement and social movements also come together. For those of you who know Taiwan well, we have lots of social groups. The civil society is very vibrant in terms of grouping and for all kinds of social issues. The most important feature is that they're always united. When it comes to environment, all groups join together for the demonstration or for the issue. When it comes to gender equality issues, environmental group, child group, welfare group, they come together and they sign and they support each other. And this is very interesting, phenomena that we observed in the past. And the same thing happened here. And I would like to mention that this is also part of the democratic movement. Taiwan's democracy is fueled with some major issues, including gender equality. And I would say gender equality and nuclear, non-nuclear, homeland issues, those are big elements pushing forward for democratization and democratic constitutionalism. So when DPP, is the first, opposition party recognized after the lifting of martial law decree, when DPP began to sort of line up social groups, they gain tremendous momentum for change. So increasingly, they become sort of in line with this social group. And of course, when in year 2000, after the first regime change, they began to experience the bitter experience of dealing with social groups, because social groups remain autonomous, and they ask more than you can provide. And this is a very interesting relationship, in Taiwan. So we began with a female president, Li Xiulian, who is the, one of the primary advocate of women's rights. And then we have now an incumbent female president, Tsai Ing-wen. What do we mean by that? Is that gender so important? Is a female president so important? Just try to imagine when we have the first direct presidential election. We thought this is a big breakthrough. We didn't know that after 3 or 4 terms, there is going to be a female president. And it happened. It happened right now. She is the incumbent president seeking for re-election. This is happening. So it's very interesting to know her position on this, and how people expect her, and how she perceives her role as a president on matters like this. There are many mass demonstrations, or sometimes parades, sometimes just carnival, in Taiwan, including this one. So that is presidential office. All too often, that groups gather around or in front of the presidential building to have their voice heard. So they have that kind of projection, on the building or on the presidential building. They even put the victim, including 2 that I mentioned, name on there, reminding people how many people suffer from that. So you can see some very innovative, interesting demonstration going on, not in museum, not in parks, but in front of the presidential building. And here is that cross. That cross, this one, is what we call Little Southgate. Actually, whenever there is a demonstration, we always look into that spot, because it's just in front of the presidential building, and also by Ministry of Foreign Affairs. So that is the big square, and we look into that, and all too often we see demonstration like this, and this is only just one. This is just one. Then let's talk about the court. Earlier constitutional court ruling was not quite friendly. It was not friendly. The Judicial Interpretation number 554, this is in year 2002, even say something like this. And I kind of put that here, still stick to the traditional structure. But in the Judicial Interpretation number 748, there is a completely different composition of grand justices. Only a month before that, there was a reshuffle. Actually, it's not political, action. It was they expire. About half of the grand justice expire for President Tsai to nominate and put people into the court. So I would say for those justices who deliberate in 748, at least half of them are new. Represent they are younger or maybe more diverse. I forgot to say something about the change in the parliament. That is, after 2005, our last round of constitutional revision, we now have what we call proportional representation. So in the Congress, we have those people who are through proportional representation, that represent the interest of the nation, of the society, not in a single district. So they look into issues in different way. And now we see after years of change, Constitutional Court gained its reputation and integrity year after year, term after term. And now they have a case in front of them. This is the case they reject to hear before. So they retake the issue and finish all of that in less than 1 year. And that was one hearing. One hearing was held in the court. There were government representatives presenting there, and also social groups and lawyers arguing in the court. For example, my colleague, Wen-Chen Chang, he argued for same-sex marriage in front of the court at that time. And I was supposed to go, and I was at that time the Minister of the Interior. What do we mean by Minister of Interior? Because it's also a party to that, because Ministry of Interior has to take care of the legislation. But for civil code, the primary authority is Ministry of Justice. Ministry of Justice to take care of civil code anyway. So in the end, Ministry of Interior has to defer to the judicial decision, the legal opinion of the Ministry of Justice. So Minister of the Justice preside in the court. He says something pretty much offending the same-sex marriages supporting group, because he says something very sort of reserved and thinking that it's going to be in violation of tradition or things like that. And I was not there because I was not the primary one, but the chief of the registration went there. My instruction to her was simply say, for household registration, as long as there is any change allowing that, we are ever ready. This is our position. We only speak for the registration. We don't want them to say, for registration, it's going to be insurmountable and going to be, so there is no delay, as long as you make that decision. We are not there to make any decision. But go there and tell the justices, as long as you make any decision, we are ever ready to fulfill, to implement that. So that was the participation there. And the argumentation in that hearing actually was so sophisticated. It's from constitutional theory, from practical social structure, from history, and I think that hearing is really one of the best conference that we had on the issue. So it's good that the court have this kind of open hearing, and it's also educational. And it's also online. It's very interesting. It's online, so people, particularly students, they get access to all the remarks there, and they have their judgment, and they participate one way or the other in that. So this is the hearing before the decision. And they got support from lawyers and from social groups. This is the first time that Mr. Chi got supported by groups and professionals. Then comes to Judicial Interpretation 748. I summarize 5 points for you. Number one, the provision of Chapter 2 of the Marriage Part 4 on family of the Civil Code do not allow two persons of the same sex to create a permanent union of intimate and exclusive nature of the committed for the committed purpose of managing a life together. You say you failed to do so. It didn't allow. This is first judgment. The second judgment will be the said provision to the extent of such failure. This is a failure. Are in violation of both the people's freedom of marriage. So this is marriage, not union. Freedom of marriage, as protected by Article 22, and the people's right to equality as guaranteed by Article 7 of the Constitution. Two provisions were cited. Article 7 is equality clause. In that equality clause, it only mentioned party, men and women, class, and what others, it didn't mention about sexual orientation or anything. But the court nevertheless create this and thinking it's part of the equal protection. So they create this clause under Article 7. So Article 7, right to equal protection could guarantee the rights of people with same sex seeking for a permanent union. And number two, freedom of marriage. Freedom of marriage, there's no words whatsoever about freedom of marriage in the Constitution. Only in Constitutional 22, it says that foregoing provisions recognizing rights and freedom, right? Other than that, if you find those rights not in violation of public interest or anything, you can still recognize them, something like that. And the court actually recognized marriage freedom, freedom of marriage as part of the rights guaranteed by the Constitution. These are two major, rulings in the Constitution. The second part. Then comes the third part. The authority concerned shall amend or enact relevant laws in accordance with the ruling of this interpretation within 2 years from the issuance of the interpretation. 2 years grace period for compliance. This is a very typical way Taiwan's constitutional court do. When they rule something unconstitutional, at the same time, they give a grace period of time for them to comply. So this time, 2 years. These 2 years is so critical, and I will talk about that later. So critical, and you create a space for social groups, for different social groups to respond, and also to tolerate and to deliberate. So 2 years, very, very significant. It is within the discretion of authority concerned to determine the formality of achieving equal protection of the freedom of marriage, although it's unconstitutional. But how are you going to deal with that? You have 2 years grace period, and also you can choose whatever form that you so desire. Okay, so this is the second space provided by the court. These are extremely important to the data development, particularly the politics after this interpretation. And these two spaces provided by the court sort of pave the way for future deliberation. If relevant laws are not amended or enacted within the said 2 years, the court sort of come up with the knife again. If you fail to do so, two persons of the same sex who intended to create a say permanent union shall be allowed to have their marriage registration effectuated at the authority in charge of household registration. That was my registration, my agency. because you say you are ready. So if in 2 years, the law hasn't come out yet, citizens still go to the registry and ask for registration, and you must take the case. So this is 5 points. 5 points. Of course, the whole decision is quite lengthy, and it's available in English also. Then I would like to talk about theoretically. There's one thing very, very important for us to know. That is, to what extent, when we are launching dramatic social change, we take judicial means. Why don't we take social means or political means that the society deliberate and reach a consensus before we do anything? How come that you ask a court to lead the society? Of course, there may be some democratic legitimacy issue, but also there will be practical implementation issue also. So it's legitimate to ask whether it's the right route. You can't expect the court always leading us, sort of spearheading the society all the time, right? So Gerald Rosenberg, observing the same happening in the United States, come up with that, The Hollow Hope, that very important book, right? There he developed some what we call backslash thesis. That is, when you rely on the court to do social reform, there may be some sort of backslash from the other side, resulting in the dilution or even devastating effect to the gain that you thought you have achieved in the court. Particularly when you look into Roe versus Wade, Griswold versus Connecticut, and many cases like that, you find that whenever court come up with some solution, the other side would respond, and politics would intervene, come up with new law, more restriction, or in the society they may have some sort of boycott or set up some stone before you, something like that. Okay, so Gerald Rosenberg says something like this: when courts innovate through recognition of important constitutional rights, they are not only effectual but counterproductive, because they deflate social movement energy from more productive channels and produce backlash from energized counter movement. And I should say, theoretically, this is divided because others will come up with different counter example. But this is an issue. This is a constitutional law issue when it comes to court, court solution for channeling social change. But this is only about court. It didn't say social movement versus social movement or political decision versus political decision. Not like that. We only focus on court because, more probably than not, in the past, constitutional scholars always look into court for solution, while neglecting the broad social context like that. So, yeah, there are different views about that. I would say to take the thesis of backlash broadly, there is also backlash in Taiwan after Judicial Interpretation 748. The next day after the 748 decision, people gathering around the legislature because they know the next ground will be in the next legislature. So they gather around, and of course this is the main arena for anti-same-sex marriage people. But pro same-sex marriage people also appear. So you see the kind of confrontation. Well, this is a live experience. At some point, I was in the Congress I was interrogated by some of the legislature on some other matter in the Ministry of Interior. And there were people from two sides chanting each other in front of the legislature. And at the time, the opposition legislator asked me, "Minister, what do you hear? Isn't this so chaotic? It's all your government created all of this chaotic." And he asked me again, "What do you hear?" And I reply, "I hear the voice of democracy." Period. Because they only talk to each other. Maybe they sort of charge, but no violence. And they keep showing, they keep exhibit their idea and their move. We were hoping that there will be some even thorough deliberation, discussion about that. They can find out our common future, But this is the voice of the democracy. So when we see this kind of demonstration, either people in the government or in the society, just take it. It's a right-wing expression. And since after so many student-led demonstrations, the demonstrators always are very disciplined. They clean everything after the event. And this is what happened in Taiwan. When it comes to demonstration, you may look, they are very, furious, but even the police right now, particularly in the past several years, even the police is very restrained. And they even talk to each other. There are some sort of tolerance, and we should do this, do that. And that's why there has not too many bloodshed in that kind of demonstration. And likewise is going on in Hong Kong right now. And it's very different. You see the pattern, it's really very different. So you see lots of people, it's a big event, but not intimidating. And it doesn't seem that society is going to fall apart, no. It seems that people are coming out to express their idea. And this is what democracy is about. Okay, so we take that as normal. And then political parties began, to respond, but very surprisingly, after that judicial decision, political party never err strongly about that. They sort of low-key, while some individual legislator may have a different say after the judicial interpretation. Then the religious group lined up to form a coalition. It's a coalition, not individual religious group. So religious group will say, we do not intervene. But there are people that lined up from different groups. So you see, basically, lots of religious groups come out and oppose that. But as we know, there are also people in the religious group who support that. But those people who come out. And then the other LGBT-friendly lined up also. And then the other group lined up also. So after the judicial decision, you see mobilization and grouping, all regrouping. That's what happened after that. The Family Guardian Coalition even filed a lawsuit to revoke the JY interpretation, but this is just a sort of formalistic measure. And then Yunlin County Council appealed to the Control Yuan. It's one of the 5 yuans to impeach the justices of the Constitutional Court. But of course, it is also political action. Nothing followed. Okay. And then referendum. It takes multiple participant and also participatory channel to resolve this issue. So we have court ruling, we have legislative debate, we have election, and then also this referendum. After 748, there is a major election ahead, 1 year ahead. So the group take advantage of this, seeking to reverse what the court said. But, you know, as you see into the proposal, you find out that the court has settled almost everything. And for those referendum, it's only just like small things within the space provided by the judicial interpretation. That is 2 years and also format of the legislation. So you will see, okay, court render the interpretation and about, you know, 1 year, more than 1 year, election and referendum. Election and referendum came together. The anti-same-sex marriage group penalized the government, penalized the ruling party, one way or the other. The ruling party got the biggest setback in the election. That election was about local county mayors, which is also very important, a combination of 9 local elections, and the DPP lost tremendously. Even Kaohsiung, of course, Taipei, and in devastating defeat. So would they begin to think that, gee, we make a mistake, so we should turn around? Or they will say, no, we will still, you know, march ahead. There was some sort of concern before the election, and that's why the legislative move become a little bit slow. So that doesn't mean they are stupid. They know, but they kind of remain that kind of dialogue. In the end, waiting for this legislature, that is 19 May the 4th. So these 2 years, lots of happening, including one referendum. How about that referendum? There are primarily, actually, 5 referendum relating to gender issue, but these 3 are very important. Let's say proposal number 10. Do you agree that marriage defined in the Civil Code should restrict to the union between a man and a woman? Do you know it's got adopted? That means it should be developed between men and women. But it say very critically, in the Civil Code. If you do something else out of Civil Code, maybe you can still go around. So that referendum was passed. And then the second one, Coalition of Happiness for Our Next Generation. Do you agree to implement the protection of same-sex couple rights of permanent cohabitation by way other than amending the marriage definition in the Civil Code adopted? That means the referendum simply show a consolidated of people who oppose revising Civil Code. This is the biggest war zone. If the government intended at that time to revise the Civil Code, that would be devastating. So there has been effort trying to negotiate whether it is possible and acceptable to all the groups that we set up separate statute to implement this same-sex marriage law. But you know, after the judicial interpretation, some of the groups, they take a very high profile. That is, we simply have to revise the Civil Code. As long as we revise the Civil Code, it's fundamentally change the embedded structure. And that is what we are going to do. They reason in a very reasonable way, I think, but the political reality is certainly impossible. So I found restraint. After that, after the referendum, I found restraint from all corners. It's very interesting. They still argue with each other, but when it comes to the final resolution, because there is a deadline there, that deadline means 2019, May the 24th. So only a couple of days before the deadline, the Congress passed that legislation. And there are some sort of, let me jump up that. Okay, so these are before the legislation. People argue that you should abide by the result of the referendum. And some read the referendum in a broad way by thinking that same-sex marriage has been rejected by the general public. But people know that this is not. It's just about how to revise and how to do legislative enactment. So lots of sort of petition. That building is Executive Yuan. Now it's in the executive. So sometimes executive, presidential building, Congress, and court, almost every branch of the government involved. Okay. I would like to mention that space provided by 748, space in time, that's 2 years, and space in legislative format. This is very important. This is very important. It was not that recognized at that time. People always has been they are cheering the victory that we have, marriage rights and also protected by Article 7 of the Equality Clause. So in light of the referendum, legislature did not alter its existing definition of marriage in civil code, enact a special law for same-sex marriage instead. So civil code remained there, men and women. But there is a special law guarantee this same-sex marriage. It's not to the satisfaction of some of the group that they advocate, because they know, and I also understand, that it's not only about law. It needs social recognition. When it comes to legal change, after all, it's between families, communities, whether they are going to embrace, whether they are going to recognize and accept, same-sex marriage. Even not only marriage, there are people who choose not to have a marriage, but they still want to have that kind of social dealings. They want to gain their dignity and recognition and acceptance. So some people look into that thinking this is not, this is not what we really want. But in the end, the society have to come into terms. And gradually they change. Even before the vote, this is the inside story. Before the vote, legislators in KMT had ready to promote a bill that would not define same-sex union as marriage. They tried to sort of downplay all of that. In the end, there was a compromise. The ruling party, they sort of swallowed some of the defeat in the hope that opposition party can also join, so that the legislature can come up with a legislation before the deadline. In the end, there was compromise. I still remember the caucus leader of the DPP come up with a very touching speech. He was saying that, I know lots of people have been fighting for this for such a long time, and we are not doing to that extent. But we got to know. He was pro-reconciliation and pro. And I have even some view about that. I think this is good, because you provide opportunity for others to claim victory. Particularly those people who were very upset that they have their view for some reason, their view, that they don't want to see this kind of legislation happen. But in the end, they have to accept that. By doing that, they actually believe that their effort pays somehow. So they gain something also. When you see there is a result that no political party come out and claim complete victory, and also the same-sex marriage group, they are not putting the high profile in celebrating. The society get more stable. So after the legislation, I would say after the judicial interpretation, there were lots of complaints. But after this legislation, people have not too many complaints. Political parties are not picking up this issue as something to gain. Politicians, including the president, including the political party, including legislator, they are not proclaiming that this is their credit. So the society get more and more sort of see each other as someone cooperating. So not complete victory. And no claiming, including the president, never come out, particularly before the election. She will not come out and say, I am the one who pushed forward for this, this achievement and something like that. Never. Doesn't try to provoke that kind of tension. And so after this legislation, as I mentioned, there are statistics, and the bureaucrats began to work and accept that registration. And so far, I haven't seen any kind of obstacles so far. But it's up to the society, learning all of this, learning tolerance, learning acceptance, learning recognition and respect, and begin to honor this in every corner of the society, in the school, in the courtroom, in the working place, in everywhere. But it may take time. And I'm sure this is not the product. I actually have a very lengthy sort of interplay chart for this is public mobilization, and in the center, legislature and judiciary. So they have kind of causal relationship. One trigger the other trigger like that. So I have this analysis, but I'm not going to go through. I just want to say there are interactions. It's not a single move. There are interactions like that. And I would like to mention a little bit about President Xi. President serving a very important role in Taiwan when we are divided, particularly divided about Taiwan's status, identity, this time divided about this. What's the role of the president? President could play two roles, completely different roles. One is come out, achieve his or her goal while making the society more divided. The president can come out and while achieving his or her own goal, but manage to be, harmonious society and kind of low-key, not jumping out to claim or anything. And I have found the current president in playing a role like that. After the presidential election, we have 4 presidents. The first KMT, President Lee, father of the democracy, and second followed by first regime change to DPP. So this is the first regime change. And the second regime change, swing back to KMT again. Another 8 years, swing back to DPP again. And now she is in almost the 4th year and about to seek the re-election next January, only 2 months ahead. The last 3 are all the graduate of National Taiwan University Law School. They are all they are all a few years senior to me. So I personally have developed some sort of relation, friendship with all of them. You know, different party, different personality, and it's the first time we have a female president. And she just at the right time to do something like this. And I have been observing all of that, and I found this is not her credit. I won't say this is her credit. I think Taiwan's civil society has been playing a critical role in doing this. President simply understand how to deal with that. She could have made tremendous mistake by jumping out and claiming something big mouth and making the society even more divided, but she didn't. That is the biggest credit, I think. Particularly when the president always has to face the pressure of re-election. And there are vicious politics also, even though this is a democracy. And presidential election is a winner-takes-all game. So we have this presidency, we have this system. So before the presidential election, or even in our daily life, presidential election is everywhere. We think about that, and people take it so seriously. Because they think it's about the future of Taiwan. And it's about the values. So more probably than not, they expect the president to do something, for them. Step into this issue, step into that issue. President Chai and President Ma, very interestingly, was one time rumored that they were gay, including President Ma and President Chai. And they were able to stand firmly to respond to this issue. And for them, for two of them, they even have this particular, stake. But they are all lawyers, and I think the understanding of constitutional process and values are very, very important. Okay, let me conclude by this. People may ask, why? Why in Taiwan? Why now? The first Asian, same-sex marriage legislation. Was that because of Confucius value? Was that because of religious tolerance in Taiwan? Was that because of economic prosperity as opposed to other states? Was it because education? Because international status or international pressure? I would say this all provide a partial explanation. It could only be understood, this happening could only be understood in the framework and the dynamic operation of democratic constitutionalism developed since 1980. This is the democracy of Taiwan, has its own role, its own statistic, its own feature. Particularly when East and Central Europe, South Africa, Korea, Taiwan, are all considered in the group of third-wave democratization. But after the democratization, up to now, scholars in East and Central Europe began to wonder whether there is a crisis of new democracy because civil group become dormant, thinking that their court can do job for them, and they are, it's a credible representative legislature, so it's up to the legislature to do the job. In Taiwan, it's completely different, even now, after successful transformation from dictatorship to democracy. Citizen groups, civil society remain watchful, vigilant, and engaged in almost all kinds of issues, either electoral or non-electoral issues. And this is something very different from other parts of the world. I was in the government for many years. Do you know the biggest challenge is not to deal with the legislature, but to deal with social groups, because they have high expectation, and they all seems to us to be good ones, because they are not selfish. You see people, in area environment, women rights, child rights advocacy, and welfare, and they look so nice. And there's someone in the government, the biggest frustration would be that you can't fulfill their hope. Not that you fail in the Congress. And they ask you this or that. So in Taiwan, we never have a tradition of parliamentary supremacy. Parliamentary, to begin with, was a group of people elected from China, serving in Taiwan for more than 30 years. And gradually, we took lots of measures to revise, to change. So people take representatives as someone, of course, working for them, but they still need to watch them. And they need to cooperate with them. In other words, they need to work for us. And that's why they produce bill, and they send into the Congress. And particularly after the introduction of proportional representation, a group of legislators, they were able to look things in more, in broader horizon, with global view, and also look into the values. So most of this same-sex marriage legislation were channeled by those legislatures with proportional representation status. And I think this is good. And now, before January and right now, parties are nominating list of in the proportional representation, and people are watching whom they include in the list. And they may have tremendous impact on how citizens would vote on the party vote, because we had two ballots, one for party, one for the district. And that actually changed tremendously about the landscape of politics. Last word about court. Constitutional court, in my opinion, is not an active court. It's not a progressive court. Constitutional court is a pro-dialogue court. Honor democracy, honor political deliberation. So there are many decisions. Decision 520, for example, is the one while facing controversy over nuclear power installation. Set up some principle, procedure issues, and send it back to the politics, asking them to be responsible. You should go there to report, and you have obligation to listen. And seeking something like this, setting up stage, or setting up a platform for political discourse, and also watched by civil group. So this court ruling is also very different. And in the past, my academic focus has been on like this. So some of the articles and also writings are reflecting this kind of Taiwan's practice. I wonder whether this is going to be the mainstream, but in any way, what Taiwan has been doing is for Taiwan's good. It's not doing something to teach China. No. China could benefit a lot from Taiwan, but we are not doing this to show to China that we could do this. Why don't you do that? No. We are doing this. Some of the scholars in the West always expect Taiwan to do this. And we do this for our own good, for our just cause. And it looks like it has been doing so far well, although still lots of challenge. For example, that fake news, that populism issue is right now presented in Taiwan also. But because of the vibrant civil society and the mature deliberation, people like most of us have confidence that this is going to be overcome by watchful citizen groups. and particularly through a series of lessons, they learned. There was some defeat and some failure in the past, but they learn by cases after cases. This is actually what's going on. I hope I have presented the case for your reference. Thank you very much.
Well, we promised you questions, but I think we're going to have to renege on the offer. I do apologise, but by way of compensation, I'm going to ask Professor Yeh if we can use his slides, if we can perhaps put the slides on our website, which
right.
will give us time to look at them and think about them.
Okay,
because
sure.
they were very rich, and some of those charts that you flipped over so quickly at the end were particularly valuable. So I might, with your permission, move straight to the vote of thanks, and it's a great pleasure to have been asked to deliver that this evening. Jiunn-rong Yeh is a very old friend. I don't know about this mentor stuff, but a very old friend. And it's a great honour to have him in Melbourne again. As the Dean said at the opening of the lecture, he offers a very unusual combination of someone who's a highly distinguished scholar, but someone who also has experience and success in government at the highest level. And there could have been no better person to talk about this subject here this evening. We live in a time when movements for change sweep the world quite quickly, although not always evenly. And same-sex marriage is certainly one of those. In some respects, tonight's lecture has been a case study in how the issue was raised and resolved in one particular polity. And that story is very interesting in its own right, but it's interesting, as we've heard tonight, because Taiwan is the first jurisdiction in Asia to take this step. And that map at the beginning of your presentation was absolutely mesmerising, with Taiwan and Australia and New Zealand tucked down in one corner and the rest of the world on the other side. Absolutely extraordinary. But this is also a time when there's very considerable interest in the role of courts in achieving constitutional progress. In many countries, same-sex marriage is almost entirely attributable to the decisions of courts, and for a while the Taiwan story was in that very familiar mould. No doubt it's the Australian in me speaking, but it seems to me that there are great advantages in securing change of this kind in a way that also involves the other institutions of government and involves the people at large. And it seems to me that that is the broader meaning of the story of Taiwan we heard tonight, and is also, bizarrely, in quite different ways, the Australian story. I listened to Professor Yeh with fascination tonight. Only someone with very deep inside knowledge of his own country could have explained the intricate jurisprudential ins and outs of the events that led to same-sex marriage in Taiwan. In many ways it's a local story, but like many local stories, it offers many insights on which others can draw. And amongst some of those that I take away from the lecture tonight is the need for modesty in the face of victory, and the advantages of a very deep understanding of the possibilities of your own system, what will work and what will not. So on behalf of all of us, I express my thanks to Professor Yeh for such an interesting, timely and thoughtful lecture, and I hope he'll return again soon to give us the benefit of his insights. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Thank you very much for coming.
Fantastic. Really, really good.
Thank you, Andrea.
It was a tour de force. Great to see you. Great to be here. Are you going to write?
Sorry?
Are you going to write? That story?
Rice, eating rice.
No. Write that story.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I need to write.